One of the reasons I love Mormonism so much is because it's more than just a church. It's not enough just to show up on Sunday, throw a couple bucks in the collection plate, listen to a sermon, shake some hands, and call it a day. Mormonism is a community, almost a counterculture with its own language, customs, and practices. Sometimes I think we forget that the Lord designed it to be that way. We see this most often in our early history. This was never more evident than when the early pioneers of the church tried to do something truly radical in creating a new alphabet. This week I have Joshua Erickson back on the podcast to cover the Deseret Alphabet. We cover its history, its purpose, and ultimately its demise, which I think carries with it a warning for us today as Mormons. Stick around for that and more on this episode of the Mormon Renegade Podcast. Look, it's no secret that our society has become much more crude and coarse. To become and raise men and women of virtue and character is a Herculean task. To help with this, I have recently wrote and published a book. Now, back in the 1700s, Washington had a book called Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior in Company and Conversation. It was a book with 110 rules that talked about how to conduct yourself like a civilized person in society, something that today's society is sorely lacking. What I did is I went back through the book and I reinterpreted his original sayings for the 21st century. So the book is laid out in a way in which you see Washington's original rule. Right below that is my explanation for the 21st century, and below that you'll find 2 or 3 examples of where to use this in the real world. Now, to go along with this, there's a workbook that helps parents teach these principles and practices to their kids. To find the book, go to MormonRenegade.com, go to the bottom of the page, search out the blog post, and order your copy today. I can bear personal testimony from personal experience that this is an invaluable tool to help you raise men and women of virtue and character.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.
Joshua, how's it going?
Yeah, going well.
Good.
Glad to be here.
How's life been treating you? It's been a while, right? I mean, there for a while we were pretty consistent, and then we finished those feast days, and
yeah, it's been a while. I've been just busy with life, and my wife's expecting twins. And, and there's all the summertime projects around the yard, and yeah, I'm planning a trip to Missouri next week. So I've got a lot on my plate. Work's super busy, which is good. But
right.
I'm low on sleep, but I've been getting a lot done. So
that's always a trade-off, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know there's times where I'm like, it would just be so nice just to shut everything down for a week and then like not leave the house, right? Just be snowed in, something like that, not leave the house. But right now, that just doesn't seem to be in the cards. So when's your wife due?
It's going to be end of October, beginning of November.
Gotcha. So when we initially talked here, and I didn't realize this, but I believe it was Melissa that told me that you're kind of a fiend for the old Deseret Alphabet.
I do like the Deseret Alphabet. I have liked it since I was introduced to the Deseret Alphabet when we were in Los Angeles. I was going to graduate school, UCLA, and we were over at one of our friends' house. Actually, I think we're babysitting their kids. It was a student ward.
Okay.
So just young families. I didn't have any kids at the time. Although we had our first kid out there. I don't remember if we had our first kid or not. But anyway, we were out there. We were babysitting, and there's one of our friends. He was an English major, but on his bookshelf, and that's one of the things. When I go over to someone else's house, I always just I'm attracted to the bookshelf.
Sure. I'm the same way.
But he had a copy of one of the Deseret Alphabet readers.
Really?
Yeah. And so I picked that up and pulled it down, and it was just very cool. Actually, I have a copy right here.
Okay.
I believe it was the first reader. So I don't know if you can how.
Yeah, no, that's coming through.
So I'll show you what it looks like on the inside. So I could tell it was a Mormon book. I mean,
Sure.
it's got a beehive, it's got Salt Lake Temple, but I couldn't read anything in it. So
Oh, wow.
So it was very strange. There was these books they were printed, and we'll talk about that some more. But these books, they all had some sort of like a key in the front part.
Okay.
So
all right.
It shows the Deseret Alphabet letters and their pronunciations.
That is fascinating. Okay.
So I kind of saw that, and then kind of went through and kind of picked through the book and started to decipher it, I guess, and just got hooked. And you were going to ask a question.
Yeah. So with the Deseret Alphabet, what is, first off, I want to say it's one, again, Mormon history is so metal on so many different aspects, right? Like, people forget Brigham's not coming out here to the West and to the Salt Lake Valley just to have a place within the United States. He left America, right? Him and the Saints.
Yeah.
We're out. This hasn't gone well for us.
Right.
We're going someplace that's not America, right?
Right.
Big fan of the Constitution. He loved the Constitution, but he felt like,
I love the Constitution, but I hate the damn rascals who administer it.
Exactly. Like that. Yeah. And so you get this feeling that he's wanting to move out of there and not just start a new colony for America, but this is a different country. This is a theodemocracy.
This is the kingdom.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that lends itself to that is this idea of even its own alphabet. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's metal. I don't know how else to put it. It's absolutely cool. What was his impetus for doing that? What was his reasonings?
You know what, his reasonings were basically to make it was an impulse to make everything better. There's actually kind of several reasons, I guess, but they all kind of stem together. One is, and everyone who speaks English, and especially people who have learned English as a second language, know how difficult English is as a language among the languages of the world. And a big part of that is that we are very inconsistent with spelling.
Right.
So that was one, is to help not only children but also foreigners to learn English,
because there were a lot of folks from Scandinavia coming over at that time. Correct.
And then the other kind of dual purpose here is that there's just an idea of improvement of everything. Anything that can be improved, we want to improve. Gotcha. Including language. And there's not only it's not only just a that Yankee work ethic kind of thing, but there's also a theological reason, because we believe, and our scriptures say, that our language is corrupted.
Right.
Now, no one ever said that the Deseret Alphabet was like Adamic or something like that, but there was kind of an idea, I suppose, that this is a step towards purifying our language. Not that the Deseret Alphabet is
Adamic, right?
But but it's that idea of God helps those that help themselves, and we show God that we want a pure language, and so we should demonstrate that. We demonstrate our faith by coming up with a new alphabet and trying to purify English as best we can, and then maybe we'll qualify ourselves to receive more.
Right. So how long was the Deseret Alphabet being used? I mean, what's its lifespan?
It was short, a decade or two. So I actually have a presentation here. I don't know if you've got it up there.
I'm going to go
through it. We'll go through the history, and the history actually starts before Brigham Young.
Okay.
So I'm going to start by talking kind of about the history of English reform, English spelling reform, English language reform, and also some of the ideas that go into language and alphabets and things like that, and then how the Mormon experiment into English reform kind of ties into the larger English reform. So, okay, first slide there. CH equals what? Sh or ch. Right. Usually we would say ch. I like it as in
church.
Yeah, like church, which is the next slide,
right?
So church. But next slide, what about cello or witch or actual?
Okay.
So sometimes we spell that ch sound with just a C or with a TCH or with a T, and this is frustrating to children,
right?
Because we're like, just sound it out, and then they realize they can hardly sound out anything.
Right.
I don't know if you've ever tried teaching a child to read. It's oh, this one is an exception. This one just says, this one says actual.
In full disclosure, I never worked with my kids much on reading because I'm dyslexic, and so I learned to read by not like phonetics, but I learned to read based off of cat is a good, just an example, right? CAT is cat. I don't see it CAT, right? Sometimes those are scrambled, but what I was able to do is figure out if those three letters are together, it's probably cat. And so that's how I learned to read. So, but yeah. Yep.
That's good. So now we could say, well, okay, there's a lot of ways to spell that CH sound, but if we do see CH, then surely that's going to be a ch sound,
right?
But we're not even that good, right? So next slide, what about sometimes CH makes a sh sound, like we would think of as an SH sound,
right?
Like Charlotte, or sometimes CH is silent,
right?
Like yacht. And sometimes it makes a K sound, like chaos. Yeah. And it is chaos.
It is confusing, isn't it? I didn't even think about it, but when you stop to think about it, it's got to be frustrating.
It's tremendous. So, have you seen this word before?
Gaudy.
It looks like gaudy or Gaudy, maybe you'd pronounce it, but
John Gotti. That's where I went to when I first saw it. Yeah.
This word is actually pronounced fish.
What?
Yeah, go to the next slide. Actually pronounced fish. Okay, and you go to the next one.
Yep.
And how do we know it's pronounced fish? Well, because it's has a GH, which is like in rough.
Yeah.
Okay. And O like in women.
Yep.
And TI like motion. So,
okay.
Fish. Yeah, fish. That's how you spell fish. Or you could spell fish this way, right?
I guess you could. Yeah.
According to the rules of English.
No, you're right. You're right. Okay.
The rules of English are all over the place. So there's a poem that I like.
Okay. Oh, strange lingo.
Yes, our strange lingo. I'll read it here. When the English tongue we speak, why is break not rhymed with freak? Will you tell me why it's true? We say so, but likewise few. And the maker of the verse cannot rhyme his horse with worse. Beard is not the same as herd. Cord is different from word. Cow is cow, but low is low. Shoe is never rhymed with foe. Think of hose, dose, and lose. And think of goose, and yet with choose. Think of comb, tomb, and bomb. Doll and roll, or home and some. Since pay is rhymed with say, why not paid with said, I pray? Think of blood, food, and good. Mold is not pronounced like could. Wherefore done, but gone and lone? Is there any reason known? To sum up all, it seems to me, sound and letters don't agree. Yeah. And so this problem with English, which has been the bane of everyone who's learned English for centuries, was noticed and attempted to be corrected first by some of our founding fathers.
My man.
Yeah. Benjamin Franklin.
Okay, I got him there. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, Benjamin Franklin was one of the first who tried to fix this problem. And he came up with.
Gotcha. Yep.
He came up with a reformed alphabet, and there it is, right there. He came up with this idea in 1768, but he didn't actually publish it until 1779. And he had a little book that he published in. So what's the difference here? He actually got rid of 6 letters.
Okay.
So they're the ones crossed
C's
out,
J's out, Q is out, W, X, Y is out.
Yep. And then he had some extra letters to make some vowel sounds and also some combination sounds. So
real quick, did Brigham try to borrow from this at all?
No, not directly.
Okay.
No. So there's his alphabet, and he had also, so this alphabet he basically got rid of 6 and added 6.
Right.
So it still had 26 letters, which is not enough to spell all of the sounds in English. So, but he had some ideas for like kind of standardization too. Like when we have an oi sound, oi, like an oil or
right.
boy, like we're always going to spell it with this combination of letters.
Right.
We're not going to do oi sometimes and oi sometimes.
We're going to standardize it.
Right.
Gotcha.
So it's it was a simplification and also a standardization that he was looking at. So he came up with this idea. When he came up with this idea, he was actually living in London. He was back, across the pond, and he showed his new scheme to his landlady and to his landlady's daughter, who was named Mary Stevenson. And Mary was he kind of adopted her as his own daughter.
Okay.
He had a daughter, I guess similar age, named Sally, but back at home. Anyway, he showed this to her, and she didn't really like it. So she actually sent him this letter back, and she actually wrote with his new system and saying, "Dear sir, I have transcribed your alphabet, which you think might be of service to those who wish to acquire an accurate pronunciation, if that could be fixed. But I see many inconveniences as well as difficulties that would attend bringing your letters and orthography into common use. All our etymologies would be lost. Consequently, we would not ascertain the meaning of many words. The distinction, too, between words of different meaning and similar sound would be useless unless we living writers publish new editions. In short, you believe we must let people spell on in their old way, and as we find it easiest, do the same ourselves. With ease and sincerity, I can, in the old way, subscribe myself, dear sir, your faithful and affectionate servant, Mary Stevenson." So Benjamin wrote a letter back to her with his new system, kind of addressing some of her points, right? She says, it's going to be difficult. And basically his reply was, yeah, but English is already difficult. So it's not a matter of whether there's going to be difficulties or not. The question ought to be, which is more difficult? Which is going to be the easiest thing to do?
Gotcha.
Is to switch to this new system, which is unified and simplified and logical, or to continue with the current system, which is cumbersome and hardly anyone knows how to spell well, and that's difficult too.
Right.
So and of course Benjamin, he believes that the difficulties of switching to a more unified, coherent system outweigh the disadvantages.
Gotcha.
Okay. He basically says, those who are presently bad at spelling is only because they spell contrary to the bad rules that we have. Right? They misspell because they end up spelling things more phonetically than they are written.
Than what they are.
And so they won't, those people who are bad spellers right now, they won't even have to really learn to be good spellers. They'll just spell like they normally do, but we'll just have good rules that they'll just follow naturally. So Anyway, so that's his kind of
Gotcha.
his answer there. He also says that that it'll make learning for foreigners and children easier, which is kind of the same thing that Brigham Young said too. When it comes to etymology is the origins of words, like whether this comes from the Greek or the French or Latin or whatever. But he says, that stuff doesn't matter. And English has, by this point, English had already changed spelling many times.
Oh, yeah.
So saying we're going to lose, the origins of words is kind of a moot point because words just have been changing anyways.
Right.
And so those who are scholarly and interested in that will keep track of it. And for the rest of us who don't care, it's not an issue. So anyway, so he goes on. One of her arguments was her third argument kind of was that there would be a loss of distinction between words who are different in meaning but the same in sound. So she's talking about what we call homonyms.
Okay.
So did my S get picked off on there? So sorry. Homonyms. So there's two kinds of homonyms. There's those things that are called homophones or homophones, and then homographs.
Right.
Homophones are things that have the same sound, right? So like two, and two. And she's correct that with like a standardized spelling based on pronunciation, then all of these three twos would be spelled the same way.
Right.
However, we already have words like that. The other kinds of homophones, things that are homographs, like bow of a ship and bow in archery, those are spelled the same. And when you're reading, how can you tell those apart?
Context.
By the context. And so that was his reply is, yes, some of the things that are homophones, they will become like homographs. And actually these homographs, bow and bow, those would actually become differentiated by spelling, whereas they are not now. So some things would become differentiated by spelling that are not now, and other things we would lose the differentiation. But the problem is still the same. We just, from context.
So I'm just sitting here thinking about it, and the words that seem like they would end up with the same spelling probably don't make that much of a difference, because they tend to be words that they're not words that are going to make or break your point of communication.
Yeah. You'll be able to tell from the context usually easily. And for those words that you can't tell by context, that's how jokes are made.
Right. Absolutely.
That's where puns come from. So
absolutely.
Then there are things that are both homophones and homographs, like stock.
Right.
Stock and stock. Those are two different words. One is the stem of a plant, and one is like to follow your prey or to.
And I'm just thinking, you got stock, which is follow, stock, like the stock of a plant. But then you got like livestock.
Right. Which sounds
too much alike anyway.
Yes. And that's another kind of stock.
Yeah.
It's a stock market, right?
Yeah.
Which is, stock like, anyway, you get the idea.
Yep.
We already have so many words that sound the same or are spelled the same, but have different meanings that this is not going to be any difficulty. So Benjamin, he publishes this, but it doesn't really catch on. No one ever talks about, except for historians or whatever, talk about Benjamin's, for the Franklin alphabet. But he does get one notable convert.
Okay.
And that is a man named Noah Webster.
Really?
Who is also, one of the founding, I would say he's one of the founding fathers.
Sure he is. Yep.
Yeah. And Webster was originally in favor of standardization, but not really simplification. But Franklin kind of won him over to that idea.
Okay. So now let me ask you this. Some of those other symbols that Franklin put forward, are some of those referenced in like Webster's dictionary to this day? Does he use
what? He might. Webster actually, in some of his later writings, he actually like pays tribute to Franklin and his ideas, and I think he does print. Um, not that Webster doesn't adopt his actual alphabet,
Right.
but he kind of adopts his ideas, and it's like,
Okay.
yes, we definitely need. English is a mess,
Right.
So we need to do more than just standardize. We need to actually
Okay.
make things coherent.
Gotcha.
So, and Webster was, he was a patriot, and he thought, the English language has partially been corrupted by the British monarchy.
Sure.
And their flirtations with the French monarchy, and they want to, impress the French or whatever. And so that has kind of messed up everything, and the whole thing's just corrupted. And Americans are we're a new country, a new world, a new people, and we should have a separate and distinct everything, including the alphabet. Or not necessarily, he wasn't necessarily interested in the alphabet, but a separate way of writing.
Was there any flirtation either with Brigham or Franklin on the idea of maybe a different language altogether?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
Yeah. That's interesting though. But yeah, I don't think they ever considered that. English is nice. A lot of its problems are just with the written version.
Yeah.
So so he did dedicate some of his writings. He wrote something called the Dissertation on the English Language, and it was dedicated to Benjamin Franklin. And in his first dictionary, which was first dictionary was in 1806, Compendious Dictionary of the English Language. There was an article in there on the irregularities of English, and I think he may have referenced some of Franklin's characters in there. But anyway, and then of course, 20 years later or so, he comes out with his second edition, which is the Webster's 1828, which has gained a lot of fame. Yeah. It was originally in 2 volumes, but a lot of times you'll see it
in one volume.
The reprint in the modern volume. Yeah. So not everything that Webster wanted to do has kind of been adopted, but a lot of them have. I saw this funny meme the other day. English spell it color with a U, and America color with no U. England spells humor with a U, and America humor with no U. England flavor with a U, and America no U. England, what the hell are you doing? Getting rid of you.
That's pretty good. I like it.
So that was the idea. So so this was 1806, 1828. We're getting up to kind of like Restoration time period.
We're starting to approach that time. Yep.
So on the scene comes this man who is of vital importance to the Deseret Alphabet, Sir Isaac Pitman. So, and he in 1830, let's see, like
in 1845.
Yeah, actually, I'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
So he was a key player. So the first thing he did is he developed in 1837, and this is when he published it. In 1837, he came up with what he called phonography.
Okay.
Or it's more commonly known as Pitman shorthand.
Okay.
So this was the invention of shorthand. So you know what shorthand is? Yeah. So it's a way to take dictation
really quickly.
And before Pitman came up with this, there wasn't really a way to do that.
Really?
So, which is why many of the sermons of Joseph Smith, for example, are kind of fragmentary. And what they would do, because they didn't have shorthand, it hadn't been invented yet, and even after it had been invented, it took a while to kind of spread to America, especially without telephones and internet, whatever. So they would have like multiple scribes, writing as fast as they can, and they would miss stuff, but hopefully the other guy would catch it, right?
Oh, okay.
And so so you read Words of Joseph, and there's the King Follett discourse is cobbled together from, I don't remember, 4 or 5 different scribes, and so it's not quite as satisfying. But with Pitman shorthand, people could write very quickly. In fact, the world record for this, and this is hard to believe, but I read this in my my research. But in 1922, there was a guy named Nathan Barron who was able to take dictation at 350 words per minute, writing by hand.
That is nuts.
Pitman shorthand. That is faster than people can type.
Yeah.
The fastest, I looked this up too, the fastest typing with a keyboard is like 300 words per minute, which is smoking. But with Pitman shorthand, you can write extremely fast, which means someone could be giving a sermon and you can just write it down word for word, verbatim, with this system and capture everything. And so this is why we have the journal discourses.
Right.
We have full word for word sermons of Brigham Young and John Taylor, but not of Joseph Smith.
So what would happen is that 4 or 5 guys would be assigned to go take shorthand, and the hope was that what one guy missed, the other guy would have, and then you could put it all together, kind of based on recollection back from shorthand.
You're talking about in Joseph's day?
Yeah.
And they wouldn't
not in Joseph's day, but in Brigham's day.
Oh, yeah. In Brigham's day, they would have, sometimes there'd just be one scribe and he would catch everything.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Dude, I don't have enough command of the English language to speak 350 words per minute.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I know some people who can, like my daughter, for example.
Right.
But yeah, that's faster than most people speak, probably. I don't know what a normal speaking rate is, but 350 words per minute is probably more than sufficient.
Absolutely.
Now, not everyone can go that fast necessarily, but if you're good at Pitman, and other kinds of shorthand have been devised as well, other systems. And actually, Pitman has kind of fallen out of favor because Pitman, and there's a little chart there on the slide, but,
right.
Pitman would distinguish between different letters, sometimes with the weight of the stroke.
Okay.
Which is easy to do when you have
right
a nib pen or whatever that has the the flexible, and you can, or a calligraphy kind of pen,
right,
something like that. But ballpoint pens, which is what we use now, you can't make thick and thin lines really.
No.
So Pitman has mostly been replaced by another system called Gregg shorthand, which actually distinguishes between letters by the length of the stroke rather than the weight of the stroke. So, but there still are people who use Pitman. You just have to have a writing instrument that will allow you to.
So this is an honest question. I'm not being a smart ass here. I'm serious. Why is shorthand even still a thing in the day of voice recording and that sort of thing?
It's probably mostly a hobby for people nowadays. If anyone's into it nowadays, but there was a time period when ballpoint pens came out, but voice recording and video recording wasn't the thing,
right?
And Pitman was replaced by Gregg.
Okay, I got you.
Point. So
I got you. And I was going to say, if that's your hobby, someone needs to discover girls. I mean,
there might be girls who are interested in.
That's true.
Shorthand.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point too.
I don't know. Okay, so now his system of shorthand basically is a system of writing sounds.
Okay.
So, which is why he called it phonography. So writing sounds. So rather than trying to, he doesn't have a quick way to spell. He has a quick way to capture the sounds that are being transmitted. So it was phonetic.
Right.
And he also had just single symbols for many of the common words, the and whatever. You just write a particular mark as a shortcut. So there were shortcuts for very common things, and then the rest of it was phonetic.
Right.
So there's an example there. So just a couple of definitions here now. First of all, so when we talk about orthography is basically spelling. It's just a fancy word for spelling. It does technically include some other things, but when you see on the slides, or you hear me, or if you go look up the Deseret Alphabet and try to do your own research about it, you'll see this word orthography basically means the science of spelling, or how things are spelled in a certain language. There's another word that comes up, and this is important, phoneme. So phoneme is the smallest significant unit of spoken language. So this is the smallest bits of significant sound.
Okay.
Okay, so in English, that would be the sounds that the vowel sounds that we have.
Right.
So it's not just A E I O U though, right? For A we have an A and an A and an A. Right?
Right.
Those are all those are phonemes.
Okay.
Those are simple sounds that we put together to make words. And then there's also graphemes. So grapheme is the smallest significant unit of written language. So that's how do we write the sounds, and those when you people who study languages want to see how these two kind of things interact, the phonemes and the graphemes. And there are several different kinds of writing systems. I'm going to go over these really quickly, but we have pictographic writing systems, and that's where the glyphs or the symbols represent whole ideas. And so and these kind of things, going to look at the sandstone walls down in southern Utah or whatever, these are things that are not really read, but they're kind of interpreted, right? Like I see a guy on a horse shooting a deer or something, right? So he's telling a story about hunting, and but we don't know exactly
who the dude with the horns
who the dude is, yeah, and every person's gonna kind of interpret this story a little differently. So it's not a really tight language, but it is a way of writing. Okay. Next, this is a little tighter. We have things that are called logographic languages. So where the graphemes, so again, the written pieces represent whole words, or at least like the meaningful parts of words. So Chinese and Japanese and Egyptian hieroglyphs are logographic writing systems. So here's an example from Chinese.
Right.
You've seen probably stuff like this before. So the word, or the grapheme, so the written symbol for boat, and I can't tell you how to pronounce it, but the written symbol for boat is actually a picture, and it's made of pieces,
of the boat.
Yeah, vessel with 8 mouths or 8 people. That means boat.
Okay.
So
and that would have been, you said that would have been for, well, would that have been the case within like Reformed Egyptian?
Probably, very likely. Yeah. Okay. So Egyptian hieroglyphs are.
And what about Paleo Hebrew?
Okay. Hebrew's really interesting, and actually Chinese is kind of interesting too. Chinese, these are pictures, but we've put them together into actual words.
Right.
Hebrew and Paleo Hebrew is interesting because Hebrew is basically Reformed Egyptian.
Right.
You knew that already.
Yep.
Yeah. So Hebrew is the world's first alphabet. Right. And yet it is an alphabet that's made of symbols that are pictures of things.
Right.
And so words in Hebrew would kind of you could sound them out like you would sound out alphabetic characters and tell you how to pronounce it, but the pictures of the letters would also tell you something about what the word is.
Okay.
So it's kind of it's really ingenious language. So okay, then we have syllabic writing systems. So the symbols represent syllables.
Right.
And so like Cherokee is a classic example of this. This is a man, Sequoia, and he came up with the Cherokee syllabary. So it's not an alphabet, but it has all of the syllables that are used in the Cherokee language, and then they string those together rather than letters representing individual sounds, which are strung together to make syllables, and then syllables are strung together to make words. Right? So This is kind of a little.
Now I'm going to ask a question here because I'm a nerd like this, and you may not be prepared to answer it, and that's okay. But on that syllabic system, is there any correlation that we know of between like Native American syllabic and maybe a Proto-Hebrew?
Yeah, or I don't know the answer to that. I know that people have looked at that.
Okay.
And I think there are some interesting things, it's not
Okay.
but I can't really comment on that.
Cool.
I think they're Cherokee is certainly distinct from Hebrew,
Right.
but kind of like with the Chinese,
Yeah.
right? The Chinese word for boat just harkens back to Noah.
Right.
Like that's from Noah's Ark, eight people in a vessel. That's the word for boat.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
think that's what I showed.
Yep.
So there's going to be similar, even though Chinese and Hebrew are as different as you can get, and yet there's these like common roots.
Okay.
Okay. And then finally we have alphabetic systems. This is where graphemes, written symbols represent phonemes, which are just the sounds.
Gotcha.
Not whole words, not whole ideas, but just sounds. So, and there doesn't need to be, and usually isn't, an exact one-to-one correspondence.
Okay.
Sometimes we might use several graphemes or several symbols to represent one sound. So English does that, like with the C and an H, we put those together to make the ch sound.
Right.
So Hebrew is an example of an alphabet, and English as well. So those are both the Shema.
Right.
Hear, O Israel, Jehovah is our God, Jehovah. So okay. So and then it is important also, just another distinction is that we have graphemes. So grapheme is kind of I said it's a symbol that we write, but it's kind of an abstract term, just because we have a letter A, which we use to write the English word as in one, like
right.
This is a water bottle,
right?
But there's a lot, but we have a lot of ways to write. But we can tell, right? We call those things fonts or whatever.
Right.
It's a lot of different styles. So
I always just thought that was to look cool.
It is to look cool. So now, if you're going to, so English is highly non-phonemic.
Right.
So the graphemes, the written symbols, and the sounds don't match up in a consistent way many times. So English has about 40, and you'll see different things, 40 to 44 phonemes. So those are the sounds. English has about 40 to 44 sounds that it makes. And we have about 45 letters that we use to represent that. Why do I say 45 letters? Because English is bicameral. So that means we have a capital and lowercase, or upper and lowercase letters. Many alphabets do not. In fact, a minority of alphabets have that. So Hebrew, for example, doesn't. There is no such thing as upper or lowercase. Proper names and proper nouns, names and places are not capitalized in any way. And most written alphabets are that way.
So even like the name of Jehovah, they wouldn't have capitalized differently to.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
That's right. They may have some sort of calligraphy or
something to set
it
apart,
like a fancy way of writing, but the idea of upper and lowercase
just didn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay.
So English is, and so that English is bicameral, so that kind of complicates things. Uppercase A and lowercase a, those are two different letters.
Right.
So we like to say we have 26 letters, but it's actually
26 times 2. Yeah.
Almost times 2, like because a C, uppercase C and lowercase c are the same. O is the same. X is the same.
You're right. So, English does suck.
So some of them have different letters, different letter shapes for upper and lowercase, and some of them are not. So anyway, but with those, so we need to represent 40 or 44 sounds with 45 letters, but we have about 250 ways that we write letters or combinations of letters to represent the phonemes that we have.
Gotcha.
So that's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it is. Holy cow.
So really, in other words, what we're saying is, in order to fully know how to pronounce and read and write English, you actually have to know 250 different combinations of letters to represent all the sounds. So a lot of those are rare, right? So we do have rules that can get us a good way there,
Right.
But there are so many exceptions in English that in order to be fully fluent, you would have to know all those things, right? So, okay, so just
Back to fish.
Yeah.
Yep.
So these are, GH is a grapheme that we use to sometimes write the phoneme.
Right.
Okay. All right. So if we want to make a more convenient or consistent alphabet, then we need to know how many sounds we need to represent. So how do we figure out how many sounds are in a language? The way that we do that, we figure it out is we look at what are called minimal pairs. So minimal pairs are words or phrases in a language that differ in only one place and have different meanings. And if they're the same everywhere but differ in one aspect, and that causes them to have different meanings, then we know that those are different phonemes.
Gotcha.
So this is kind of technical stuff, but here is a simple example: that versus dat. So are those the same? Did those mean the same? I mean, if someone says, "Give me dat microphone,"
yeah, it means the same.
It means the same, right?
Yeah.
So you might be tempted to say, well, the sound th, like in that, and the sound d, like in dat, those are
interchangeable.
They're interchangeable. They're not really different phonemes,
right?
Unless we can find a word where making the substitution does change the meaning.
Okay.
Okay. So like this. Though versus dough.
Okay. Yeah.
Are those different things? Do those have different meanings? Okay. So if we can find a pair of words that have that where we switch those two elements that we're interested in and it changes the meaning, then we know that those are actually different sounds.
Okay.
And we need then that's a phone. Then those are phonemes of the language.
Dude, I can't imagine the amount of work that went into developing,
studying this stuff.
Just studying that stuff out. That's nuts.
Right. So here's some other examples of just minimal pairs that you can use to show that P and B are different, because pin and bin.
Right? Yep.
And R and L are different in English. Rot and law. And
thigh and thigh
and the v are both spelled TH, but they are different phonemes, because if you thigh and thy are different words,
right?
Different meanings. So anyway, I won't go through all of those, but you can go through that with all the 40 or 44 phonemes in English, and you can find minimal pairs and make arguments that yes, this is the set of sounds that English needs to represent with its alphabet.
Gotcha.
Okay, so now back to Pittman. So he came up with shorthand, which was phonography, how to write really quick, and he used this phonetic idea to help simplify things. But his real love was not phonography, but phenotypy.
Okay.
So he wanted to phenotype. He wanted to actually not just make a tool for those taking dictation, court reporters or whatever, but to actually change the way that we print English, like in books.
Right.
And so here's an example of his phenotypic alphabet. And this was put together it was his first published in 1845. So remember, he did his shorthand in 1837. Right. And he came up with his phenotypic alphabet in 1845. So again, this is, things are happening in the Restoration there. Towards the end of his life, he actually was knighted. So he became Sir Isaac Pittman. It was probably a little bit bittersweet, though, because he was knighted for his efforts in phonography, so shorthand, with no mention made of the thing that he really wanted to do, which was reform the way that we read and write English. So, okay. So this brings us to
George Darling
Watt, or George D. Watt. Heard of George D. Watt?
I have not.
Okay. Well, I'm about to tell you about him. So he was actually the very first foreign convert to Mormonism.
Really?
Yep. And he happened to be in England. And he was baptized, as you can see there, July 30th, 1837. there's actually 9 individuals that were going to be baptized that day by Heber C. Kimball. He was the missionary. And Heber C. Kimball described those first baptisms as follows. He said, I had the pleasure about 9 a.m. of baptizing 9 individuals and hailing them brethren and sisters in the kingdom of God. These were the first persons baptized into the church in a foreign land, and only the 8th day after our arrival in Preston. A circumstance took place which I cannot refrain from mentioning, for it will show the eagerness and anxiety of some in that land to obey the gospel. 2 of the male candidates, when they had changed their clothes at a distance of several rods from the place where I was standing in the water, were so anxious to obey the gospel that they ran with all their might to the water, each wishing to be baptized first. The younger, George D. Watt, being quicker of foot than the elder, outran him and came first into the water. So basically,
he's on fire.
He became the first person baptized because they actually both wanted to be first, and so they decided to have a race to decide it.
Oh,
and he ran, and so there he is. Now the Millennial Star, in later on, this is in 1849, so quite a bit later, but they actually printed a likeness of him like on this card for people to like collect.
Right.
And they said they were advertising, selling these little cards saying, if you buy one, this will help him to immigrate to America. It was actually it was his second time coming back, but anyway, so he's there in England. He was baptized, like I said, in 1837. In 1846, I'm not. Okay, so sorry, I have it in the notes. In 1841, so a couple of years after he's baptized, he was called to be a missionary, and he was called to preside over the Edinburgh Conference, so in Scotland.
Okay.
So he was the mission president, basically. And while he was in Scotland in 1841, he starts studying Pitman shorthand.
Okay.
And then just a year or two after that, 1842, 43, he comes to Nauvoo, and he sets up the Phonographic Society of Nauvoo. He teaches phonography to the School of the Prophets. And
can't get enough of the Mormon Renegade podcast? Well, good news. We're on Patreon, and there's 3 packages that you can choose from. The first one, the Slightly Rowdy package, allows you to hear the podcast without all those pesky commercials getting in the way. For those who want a slightly more in-depth experience, there's the Stirring It Up package, where you can hear ad-free audio, ad-free video, and transcripts. Finally, for those who want to go full Renegade, that package is available too, where you can get everything in the previous 2 packages, plus an extra show where myself and Ben Winfield break down the news of the day from a very Mormon point of view. You will also get exclusive access to Renegade Chat, and on there you'll be able to talk to others about the show or whatever topics are on your mind. Go to Patreon today and get your exclusive content.
But, of course, Joseph Smith was martyred in 1844, right. So just very shortly after he had arrived. So he didn't do much in Nauvoo, but Joseph Smith was killed, and then they were planning on heading out west. And George Watt was actually before Joseph was killed, they were planning on heading west. And George Watt was one of the ones who had volunteered to go on that expedition to look for new places for the saints. But Joseph is killed, and plans change, and they actually send him back to England.
Okay.
In 1846 to another mission. So he goes back there, and in 1847, April of 1847, while he's there, Brigham Young writes to him, "It is the wish of the council that you procure 200 pounds of phonotype." So this is right. So Pitman had started printing books and stuff with his phenotypic alphabet.
Oh.
And there were foundries there that could make type.
Right.
And so he said, "We want you to get 200 pounds of phonotype or thereabouts, as you may find necessary to print a small book for the benefit of the saints, and cause the same to be forwarded to winter quarters before navigation closes by some trusty brother on his return, so that we have the type to use next winter.
Huh. So Brigham's already thinking about stuff.
Yeah. So you remember, right? George Watt, he was the very first European convert, but
Right.
he was certainly not the last. So
Right.
he comes to Nauvoo, 1842, 43. But before that time, and certainly after that time, there's just a flood of Germans and Swedes and Danes, and Englishmen too. But there's all these other folks who do not speak English,
Right.
and who are in an English speaking country with predominantly English speaking saints. And so, yeah, Brigham's thinking, what can we do to get these people up to speed
right.
the most efficient way possible? So this type that he asked Watt to get, we don't know what happened to that. It never arrived for whatever reason. But later on in 1847, we all know what happened, right?
Right.
They actually do leave, so they're headed
out
west. Yep, and they're dealing with all the difficulties of setting up a new life in the desert, making the desert blossom as a rose.
Right.
Okay, but they haven't been in Deseret too long before they start thinking about bigger things, which is, to me, is just such a testament to like the planning and the foresight.
Right.
Because it could so easily be a group of people who are just you could just survive.
Right. Which initially it's got to be, right, just to survive. And
then year after year goes by of just surviving, and we're in a new place, and we just grow our crops, and year after year, and that's all we think about, and maybe we go to meetings or whatever, but Brigham was interested in bigger things.
So I had a buddy who was a big survivalist, right? I mean, like hardcore do stupid crap kind of survivalist, right? Okay. Just to push his limits. And I remember once we were sitting around and we were talking about shows about that sort of stuff we liked, right? And I brought up Les Stroud, who was called him Survivor Man, right? Yeah. And then they talked a little bit about that show Alone, which, on the History Channel, which drops people out there.
Yeah.
I think there's something to this, because as we were talking about, he's like, I can always tell who's going to win. I was like, how so? And he said 2 things. Typically, the people who have stable home lives do very well.
Yeah, there's emotional stress.
Right? Because you're not worried about what's going on at home, because you trust your partner, and you trust, there's kids there, and you usually have a
peace of mind.
Peace of mind. The other thing is the people who never stop trying to improve on their situation always do better.
Yeah.
And so I think if there's one thing we can say for Mormonism, we're always going, what can we do to make it just a little bit better, right? What can I do to extract a little more meaning out of my scripture study? What can I do to extract a little more personal connection with the Savior? And I think
improvement, family improvement,
and so improvement. I think that carried over when the Saints got out west. It's just my theory. I have nothing to back this up.
Absolutely.
But I think that was one of the things that drove the Saints, was the fact that they weren't thinking about, okay, we got our crops in, we got an adobe house up, we're good. No. We're striving for something different, a little bit more. And I think that probably is what helped them become, what it has become was that desire for more.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I think that's definitely huge, is just that desire for more. And I think if you can keep that, I think we're seeing a case in that right now.
Yeah. So it's amazing. It's just so amazing. Like, you come out to the desert, the barren desert, salty desert on top of that.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, Brigham's like, hey, we need to start working on a university.
Right. Out of the gate. Right.
We need to start college educating people, So, yeah, it's amazing. So, early 1850, they actually created, by an act of the General Assembly, they created the University of Deseret, which is now the University of Utah. But it was the University of Deseret at first. So, and Orson Spencer, he was the leader. He was the chancellor. So the first board of regents, they held their meeting on the 13th of March, 1850, and they didn't have a college campus like they do now, but they just met in homes and stuff. And the board of regents, they weren't at first they weren't really teaching classes, but what their job as regents of the University of Deseret, their job was to encourage education generally among the saints, and to see what they could do to get books, either print them themselves or have books shipped in, so that we don't just end up being farmers.
Right.
That's it. But we want to be farmers, but we also want to be mathematicians and astronomers, and we want to speak many languages, and we want to know about history and geography. And like the Doctrine and Covenants says, we want to learn from every good book.
Right. And this is something I think that I can't say it's been lost to history, but it's something that's not emphasized as much either, is that when you look at the school of the prophets, they weren't just in there studying scriptures.
No way.
Right. They were in there talking about things of their day, right? The politics of the day. They were talking about different languages, studying Hebrew, learning different customs, right?
Absolutely.
And all these other things, which I think to a large degree has been lost on Mormonism now. I don't think we have those kind of things anymore, but I think it's something that's absolutely worthwhile in looking at bringing back.
Yeah, Brigham, on more than one occasion, I think, said things to the, this is not a quote, but said any elder could come up here on in a church meeting and give us a lesson about chemistry,
right,
and be giving us a lesson about the gospel.
Yeah,
because we embrace Mormonism claims all truth.
Right.
Every true principle, whether in science or art or history or religion, we claim it. It is ours. That is part of our religion.
Yep.
And so this was, right in keeping with that, too, this whole experiment. So 1851, so just a year after the University of Deseret is established, George D. Watt returns from his mission to England. He comes to Deseret and he starts recording everything. Sermons, he starts writing, and those sermons that he records, they start getting printed in the Deseret News. The majority of the sermons that we have in the Journal Discourses were recorded by George D. Watt. In fact, he's the one that publishes them as the Journal Discourses.
Gotcha.
In the first place. And if you read, well, let's see. Oh, I didn't bring it with me. Anyway, if you have a set of Journal Discourses, a lot of times maybe all the time, I don't know, but it'll have who spoke and kind of their topic and the date and the location, and it'll also say who recorded it. And more often than not, it's recorded by George D. Watt.
Really?
Yeah. And so he becomes Brigham Young's personal secretary.
Okay.
He can write faster than anyone, and
right,
without missing anything. And so 1852, Brigham Young, this is in Journal Discourses, volume 4, page 70. He says, Brother Spencer, and this Brother Spencer is Orson Spencer, who is the chancellor of the University of Deseret. Brother Spencer has used language quite beyond your reach. Well, I have the foundation and he can make the building. When he commences the building, I have asked the Board of Regents of the University of Deseret. I've asked the Board of Regents to cast out from their system of education the present orthography and written form of our language, that when my children are taught the graphic sign for A, it may always represent that individual sound only. But as it is now, the child is perplexed that the sign A should have one sound in mate, and a second sound in father, and a third sound in fall, and a fourth sound in man, and a fifth sound in many, and in other combinations sounding different from these, while in others A is not sounded at all. I say, let it have one sound all the time, and when P is introduced to a word, let it not be silent, as in physic, or sound like F in physic, and let two not be placed instead of one in apple. So this is, this is April. This is general conference stuff.
Right.
He's like, the way that we spell things, that's part of the gospel. And I'm giving him a sermon on it right here. Right. So everything falls under the purview of the gospel.
Right.
Under that umbrella. So, okay, 1853, they make a committee. Farley P. Pratt, Heber C. Kimball, and George W. Watt. A committee on coming up with spelling reform. But they don't do much until the following. That was 18. October 27th, 1853. So November 1853, they can get a committee together. Daniel Wells is there. He says, and their job is to come up with what are we going to do to standardize the orthography?
Sure.
He says, how about phonetic shorthand like Pittman? And Ezra T. Benson says, how about we just stick with the old alphabet? And Wilford Woodruff says, no, let's use a phonetic alphabet. And Farley Pratt says, how about we use Pittman's alphabet?
Okay.
And it's interesting, the notes, like the minutes from this meeting, show that Farley Pratt's suggestion kind of wins out, because George D. Watt, who's taking notes, he switches to Pittman alphabet.
Right then, like mid meeting, just like, okay, this is what we're doing.
Do it. Let's try it. Let's experiment with this. So, so that's the 18th of November. So 23rd of November, they officially decide to adopt Pittman. 26th of November, the Board of Regents, they meet together and they start learning the alphabet, like practicing together. They have their slates, whatever.
Right.
And they're practicing so that they can know about this alphabet and get a little experience so that they can pass along to others. But on the 29th of November, there's something that they had not planned on. And that is Willard Richards. He had not been attending the meetings.
Okay.
And but he comes and they have the Pittman alphabet up there, and which the Pittman alphabet was not entirely the same as the Latin alphabet, the English alphabet, but it had a lot of things in common.
Okay.
So, but Willard Richards is having none of it. He says, we want a new kind of alphabet, differing from the compound mess of stuff up on that sheet. Those characters may be employed in improving the English orthography, though at the same time, it is, as I have sometimes said, it seems like putting new wine into old bottles. Mm-hmm. Like we want a new alphabet for this experiment, and we don't want it to look like that old stuff. And actually, some other efforts at spelling reform have kind of felt the same way, because you can kind of standardize spelling using the same letters, but then it just looks like it's misspelled.
Right.
So that's kind of an argument for, let's just get new letters altogether. So it just is totally new, rather than trying to make standardization fit with the old alphabet.
So any evidence to suggest that Brigham told I'm blanking on his name here. Willard, thank you. Told Willard, hey, I think they're barking up the wrong tree. Go fix this.
Not that I know of. Brigham was at this meeting, though.
Okay, he was.
And, yes. And I think my sense is that Brigham was on board with the phenotype, the Pittman phenotype. In fact, I mean, he had written that letter to George Watt in 1847 saying, bring us back 200 pounds of phenotype.
Yeah.
Pittman phenotype. So I think he was on board with that, but Willard Richards, just spoke convincingly and kind of convinced everyone that we want to be even more radical than that. We want to be totally new. And so they decided. So that was in November. In January of 1854, the Deseret News announces that the Board of Regents, in company with the governor and heads of departments, have adopted a new alphabet consisting of 38 characters. So now the Deseret News didn't have any type for it. So they just made the announcement, but they couldn't like print any samples or whatever. But later on that year, they made some wood cuttings.
Okay.
And printed some little cards and stuff that they would hand out that showed the Deseret Alphabet. And so here's some, samples there. This on the left, this is Hosea Stout's journal.
Okay.
And he was there at the meeting of the regents, and he copied them down. This matches kind of the woodcut
Gotcha.
printed versions there.
Let me ask you this real quick. How is it received by the general membership in Utah during that time?
Yeah. I mean, at first, I'm sure it was just a sensation,
Right.
But eventually the charm wore off.
Okay.
Yeah, which is why no one knows about the Deseret Alphabet, or not no one, but
right.
It's relatively unknown. The charm wore off pretty quickly. So part of it was that they may have jumped the gun a little bit. They announced this and they put these things out, but then the Board of Regents kept fiddling with it, and they went, here's some like different versions. And they had different versions that came out. There was anywhere from like 33 to 41 characters, because they're like, oh no, we really need a letter for this. No, let's get rid of that. We can just use a combination of letters to make that sound, and we'll just make it consistent or whatever. And they just kept fiddling with it. And by this time they still didn't have any type, but in 1855 there were people who felt like it was serious. So here's one of them, John T. Morris of Cedar City. He died in 1855, and he had his tombstone,
wow,
in memory of John T. Morris, born February 14th, 1828. So this gravestone actually, that was in 1855. So it actually decayed away. I don't know exactly what happened to it, but his family replaced it with a granite stone. So that's the next.
I'll be darned, and then just gave the interpretation underneath, like,
yes,
okay,
that's right. So that's kind of cool. Because actually, I just found out while I was researching for this, there's a Deseret Alphabet tombstone in Pleasant Grove.
Oh, really?
2013, looks like November 18th, 2013. So, and actually, it's, when I die, if you outlive me, I plan to have Deseret Alphabet on my tombstone too. So you can come throw some flowers on my grave.
Nice.
Enjoy the.
Well, I hope it's not for a long time, but yeah.
Okay, so that was 1855. 1856, there was a committee put together, George Watt, Wilford Woodruff, and Samuel Richards, specifically to come up with manuscripts for children's books.
Gotcha.
Because we need to yes, foreigners are a thing, and adults who already know how to read and write, it's like, but we're interested in the children. We want that generation to have this advantage. We want them to be able to learn how to read and write, and learn how to and know how to spell and read everything
right
in 2 weeks instead of 5-6 years. I don't know how long it takes for Americans or Englishmen to get a grasp enough where you can like read a newspaper, right? It's not just, it takes
it takes years, right? I'm sitting here thinking about it, and
and that's because of the absurdities in our orthography. But so we want to teach the children, and unfortunately we don't have that. They worked up some manuscripts, but we don't have those, because something else is coming up historically. In 1857,
Johnston's army,
the Utah War. Yeah, Buchanan's blunder. Johnston's army comes into Utah, occupies. They work out a peace settlement, peace treaty. But part of the preparations for the invading army was to take all of the records of the church in Salt Lake and take them down to Fillmore.
Mm-hmm.
And among those records were these manuscripts, and they get lost somewhere along the way. So we don't have them. But and so the committee, when things settle down, the committee's like, hey, we don't have them anymore. And so Brigham said to Wilford Woodruff, take hold of George Watt and get up some more. Like,
Right.
do it again. So we don't have those original ones. We know that they talk about kind of exciting stuff like pioneers, the Mormon Battalion, Salt Lake Valley, the Deseret Territory, grizzly bears, and buffalo bull fights. We know that they talked like the readers talk about these different topics. The readers that they came up with later, which is I showed you kind of earlier.
Right.
A lot of the things in here are just kind of a little more bland.
Right.
Some of them are interesting, but anyway, it's kind of a shame that we lost those things. But okay, but so 1857-58 Utah War. 1859 though, we actually get some type.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we actually tried earlier. The Saints had tried to make their own type, but it kind of failed. It didn't turn out well. We didn't have the equipment, so they ordered some back east, and it came, and the Deseret News starts printing articles with the new alphabet. So there it is, and excuse me, what they did is they basically print like passages of scripture. So this is a section from Matthew chapter 5. So this is Sermon on the Mount stuff. And so that was kind of exciting.
Did they ever do a full set of scriptures in the Deseret Alphabet?
Well, sort of. I'll get to that very shortly.
Okay. Shelf that.
1860. A lot of things were going full speed here. So the church clerks and even like ward clerks were keeping records in the Deseret Alphabet, and gold coins. This is a $5 gold piece.
Okay.
Stamp. So 1860 says around it, "Holiness to the Lord." Okay, on the side with the line. On the other side, it's just standard orthography, but it says what does it say? Deseret Assay of can't get very well. Office. Deseret Assay Office, pure gold. $5.
Okay.
So yeah, people were keeping their journals in it. There's very interesting things that come out of a lot of this because the Deseret Alphabet is phonetic. Then without special training, people just write the way they speak.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have people's journals and letters and stuff, it actually kind of gives us a little window on what sort of accents or dialects our pioneer ancestors had.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, actually. They uniformly, everyone, including on these these readers here.
Right.
Let me show you this is the first one. This is the second one. But now, we all now say Deseret, but they wrote it Deseret. Territory of Deseret. So, anyway, so we get a window on kind of how they talked.
Their dialects and their accents even.
Right. And is another interesting thing is that the Deseret, I'll call it the Deseret Alphabet from now on. The Deseret Alphabet was used to preserve some Hopi language as well.
Really?
Because we sent missionaries, Marion Shelton and Thales Haskell, to Thales Haskell to the Hopi, and they recorded Hopi words with the Deseret Alphabet, so we can read it now and know like what the Hopis sounded like back then too.
Wow,
which is cool.
Yeah.
Another cool thing about this is that they did do the Book of Mormon. Okay, and there are a lot of Book of Mormon words that are in the Bible too.
Right.
Jesus and Jerusalem and
stuff
like that. But there's also words that are new to the Book of Mormon, right? Nephi and Shiblon and Zenos and stuff. And the LDS Church came up with a pronunciation guide, right? And it's in the back of the scriptures. But that pronunciation guide was entirely arbitrary. Okay, and they just came up with these rules of how to pronounce Book of Mormon words, just for the sake of uniformity, not for the sake of any sort of accuracy. Okay. But we can get kind of a window again on how the early saints, not necessarily Joseph Smith necessarily, but his contemporaries, how they spoke Book of Mormon names, because they're recorded in the Deseret Alphabet. And, so there's a lot of kind of cool things that come from from those recordings. So despite all this kind of activity, like I said, the charm kind of wore off, and the enthusiasm was just waning pretty quickly, because all the adults already knew how. I mean, not all the adults. There was foreigners, but everyone who spoke English already was not really that interested.
Let me ask you this: how much of that waning also had to do with, because if I'm not mistaken, this is about the time now that you start seeing some, as Brigham would call them, Gentiles coming to the Salt Lake Valley, right? Mining, railroads, those sorts of things. Are they finding that this alphabet is now posing maybe a little bit of a barrier?
No doubt that was part of it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of a little late, maybe. Like if they had done it a couple of decades earlier, right? We were getting into 1860. If they'd done it in 1850, before Johnston's army came out, maybe. Yeah, that's an interesting thought. But they don't. And even though there's all this flurry of activity in 1862, Robert Campbell, he's the superintendent of the common schools. He and I don't know if I can't imagine that he had much confidence in this, but anyway, he brings a manuscript to Brigham Young for a children's reader.
Okay.
Written with the standard orthography.
Gotcha.
He's kind of like, hey, this Deseret Alphabet thing, it's not really working out. But I have here a manuscript. It's written in standard orthography. Why don't we give it a try?
Right.
And Brigham's response was emphatic. He said I will not consent to have my type, ink, or paper used to print such trash.
he was, didn't have strong feelings at all about it then.
Right. He has very strong feelings about very few things. It's just kind of, no. So,
well, he doesn't look like a happy fella.
No one did back then. But, so obviously that doesn't happen. 1864, they're kind of, and Brigham says, if my influence was sufficient and it was up to me, I would completely drop the old system. Like, just stop, like
cold turkey it.
Throw all that type away and just do, not just because like those Deseret News articles, like it was just,
right.
It was a 20-page newspaper and there's just a little, like a column,
right,
in the Deseret Alphabet. So they're wondering what to do. 1864, the regents get back together and they decide maybe we should go back to Pittman. The idea. Pittman, has already printed a bunch of books, so we can kind of gain the advantage of everything that's been printed.
They can get type probably a heck of a lot easier.
Yes. But instead, what they ultimately end up doing is like recommitting themselves to the Deseret Alphabet. So the Deseret News starts printing articles again. And partly they decided maybe it's because the type that we got was kind of ugly, and that's an impediment. So Brigham Young, 1860. So this is 1868 now. So 1864, they decided we're gonna keep going. We're gonna try to print our own books. We're gonna get new type and all that. So by the time 1868 comes, they have gotten the new type and they've actually printed the books, or they've started printing them. So here's again. This is from in the October conference. A few items I wish to lay before the conference before we dismiss, which I think we shall do when we get through our meeting this afternoon. One of those items is to present to the congregation the Deseret Alphabet. We have now many thousands of small books called the first and second readers, adapted to school purposes on the way to this city. So they're en route. As soon as they arrive, we shall distribute them throughout the territory. We wish to introduce this alphabet into our schools. Consequently, we give this public notice. We have been contemplating this for years. I'm sure he was so happy to finally have accomplished something. The advantages of this alphabet will soon be realized, especially by foreigners. Brethren who come here knowing nothing of the English language will find its acquisition greatly facilitated by means of this alphabet, by which all the sounds of the language can be represented and expressed with the greatest ease. As this is the grand difficulty foreigners experience in learning the English language, they will find a knowledge of this alphabet will greatly facilitate their efforts in acquiring at least a partial English education. It will also be very advantageous to our children. It will be the means of introducing uniformity in our orthography, and the years that are now required to learn to read and spell can be devoted to other studies.
Okay.
So that was the whole idea, the main idea anyway. Now, at this time, like some of the newspapers back east, they were, and this goes with the Gentile influence. Like there's reports about the Mormons are coming up with this new alphabet. It's a secret, and they say it's a secret.
It's a code.
You know, it's a code to keep Mormon secrets, or to prevent Mormon youth from getting hold of the of Gentile material. They don't want them to understand that. They don't want us to understand their stuff. But anyone who's looked at anything that was ever printed, like everything always has a key in the front that shows how to read it.
Yep.
So incredibly inept secret keepers.
Right.
So that wasn't it. It was just really to improve the language. So I have it here, but it's on the slide. Here's the first reader.
That is so cool.
It's very cool. And the second one. So they printed 10,000 copies of each of these. The first,
and that's not a small undertaking back in the day.
That's enormous.
That's a huge undertaking,
and it cost them a fortune. I would think it was $10,000 or something,
right?
Like that, which is
unheard of.
Yeah. Interesting. This is just kind of a side note, but on the cover there, and you can see it there. There's a picture of the Salt Lake Temple. Now, this was printed in 1868. But the Salt Lake Temple was dedicated in 1893. So, almost 30 years later, not quite 30 years later. So which was 40 years to the day when the cornerstone was laid. So interesting is if you look close up at the picture, which I have zoomed in here, you can see the angel Moroni
resembles more the one that was on the Nauvoo temple.
And it was going to be horizontal. I saw another angel flying through the midst of heaven, like in Revelation.
Yep.
So that was the plan. But by the time they put the capstone on there, they decided on upright Moroni instead. But so that's kind of a cool thing to see, kind of an earlier renditioning of the. So 1869, Orson Pratt was put on the job of transcribing the scriptures, and he did the Book of Mormon. They originally were going to do the Book of Mormon in 3 parts, but they only ever printed the first part. So.
Oh wow!
So there it is, and there's a picture. It has the blue cover, and this contains basically First Nephi through Words of Mormon.
Okay,
that's part 1, and then they were going to do part 2 and 3. They actually never got around to doing part 2 and 3, but they did publish an entire book, which is there. It had the black cover with gold lettering.
Right.
8,000 copies of the part 1 of the Book of Mormon. And only 500 copies of the entire Book of Mormon.
Okay.
And in the church archives, they were never published, but there is transcriptions made by Orson Pratt of the entire Bible.
Oh wow!
And Doctrine and Covenants as well. So those were in the works.
So it seems by now it's almost picked up speed again, right? It is introduced.
It was,
Yeah, it kind of
it
ebbs
had
and
a bumpy
flows.
ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's, I mentioned that they thought the type wasn't very good. So I'll show you, here's a sample of the first type, which is on the left, and then the second kind of cleaner type on the right. So that cleaner type is on the right. This is what the Book of Mormon and the first and second readers were published in. The stuff on the left, this is the font that the Deseret Alpha or Deseret News used to print their articles, and you can see it is. I mean, I think they both look fine, but definitely the one on the right is cleaner and more expertly done.
Let me ask you this: does it still read left to right?
Yes. Oh, that's a good question. When you read the Deseret Alphabet, everything is the same except the letters. So yeah, left to right, capitalization. Although the Deseret Alphabet does not have, it is bicameral.
Okay.
So it has upper and lower case. Things are capitalized, but the letters are the same. There's a larger version.
Okay.
Like letter C.
It's just larger.
Just larger. But we capitalize the first word in a sentence, capitalize proper nouns, and punctuation is the same.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right.
So there it is. So this is these are both extracts from Second Nephi, chapter 30. So anyway, so you can kind of see there. So that was 1869. But yeah, all these these books are distributed to all the schools in the territory. Kids are starting to read it. But again, the interest just starts to drop off again. And by 1875, the Board of Regents is thinking about going back to Pittman. And they actually do. In 1875, they decide
we're going back
to Pittman, phonotypy. And that's what we're gonna go with. And Orson Pratt.
Is Brigham dead by this point? What year did he die?
He's not.
And, is there any indication how Brigham felt about this? Right, because going back to Pittman.
Yeah. Well, 1877.
Oh, I guess that was okay.
1877 is the year Brigham dies.
Oh.
And Orson Pratt is actually in England for the purpose of getting Pittman phonotype to bring back so they can print books with that. When Brigham dies, and he just gets called back, he never purchases the type, as far as we know. And basically, that's the end of Mormonism's experimentation into English reform. Like, it dies with Brigham. And John Taylor doesn't care about it. I don't know if he doesn't care about it, but he's got bigger problems, let me say that. So it gets totally pushed to the wayside.
Yeah, because now all of a sudden you're fighting for your life and not going to jail and living on the underground.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. I could see where that
So he gets pushed to the side and never comes back. Basically. So I have a little bit of my artwork here on the next one. It's a little bit of poetry, a little bit of calligraphy. It's the life of the Deseret Alphabet in one stanza. And it reads, an alphabet. We have got an alphabet, and we need no more alphabet.
That's awesome.
So, a little shout out to Nephi there. But yeah, that's the story of the Deseret Alphabet. So I've got those books I showed you. There are some modern things printed in the Deseret Alphabet. So there's one guy named John Jenkins, and you can find him online. But he's got quite a few books that he's
the Lectures of Faith
published with the Deseret Alphabet. He has changed the font a little bit. Kind of, he has his own spin on it. There's what the inside looks like.
Okay.
This is the Book of Mormon. So this is the John Jenkins modern version. Which is you can get on Amazon or something. If you have, by the way, one of the full Book of Mormon, like I said, there's only 500 of those printed, and it's kind of a weird thing. Those things are worth like $10,000 or something, depending on the condition it's in. But they're quite rare. So there are for a while when I was at UCLA, there was a Yahoo group dealing with the Deseret Alphabet that I joined. That's kind of gone the way now. But I actually let's scroll down a little bit. So when I was at UCLA, I was a graduate student there, and they had a web space, like a web page for every graduate student if you wanted to have your own web page. So to like highlight your research or whatever. So I ended up using mine not to do anything at all with chemistry, but I turned it into Joshua Erickson's Deseret Alphabet pages.
That's awesome.
So if you Google that, you can find it. Now, this was many years ago. I actually don't have access to these web pages to edit them or whatever anymore. And so there's a lot of dead links on there. But there's still a lot of good information on there. I've compiled a lot of things. One of the cool ones is that my website has a bunch of fonts. So and I made these fonts. I designed these with font creating software. And so
Adamic B. Times B, Tumblebee. I like it. Queen Bee. I like it.
So some of these were designed by me. Some of them were designed by other people, and I just kind of consolidated into one place. Scoured the internet. There probably have been other fonts that have been created since, but at the time I had everything that I could find, and I put it all together.
Gotcha.
So you can download those fonts, for free, and put them on your computer, and then you can type with them. It takes a little bit of doing because our keyboard doesn't have. The Deseret Alphabet has 40 characters, and there's only 26 alphabetic keys. So some of the punctuation and stuff is used, but you can go there. It's kind of cool. I have one more thing to show you. I guess I'll show that one. So when Schaefer comes to my house, he's commented on this before. It's the most it's the strangest, most iconic thing that you could see on a house. It's got
the Torah scroll with
it's a mezuzah, so it has some scriptures in there, but on the outside it says "Holiness to the Lord" in the Deseret Alphabet.
That's gangster.
That's a one of a kind.
Yeah, I like it.
And I've got lamb's blood on the door there from Passover, so it's got like lamb's blood and this mezuzah with the Deseret Alphabet. It's like
nice.
These are some weird people who live here.
No, that's awesome. So let me ask you this, because you're literally a rocket scientist. So what I'm going to default to you on this. Was Brigham's goal met with the Deseret Alphabet? Was it easier than trying to learn English?
I think yes, I think it would be, but similar to the arguments that Benjamin Franklin made.
Right.
Yeah, it would be easier. And yet, but there's just so much inertia. I'll just call it inertia. It's like social or societal inertia to get some kind of transformation like that. I mean, and that's true with all the rest of Mormonism too.
And
I mean, we're supposed to be kingdom of God, Deseret, right? But then we'll become part of the United States, and then we'll just kind of fall in line. And Utah doesn't really, I'm not talking about the church necessarily or Mormonism, but Utah as a state, we don't really lead the way in anything really. There are things that are better about Utah than other places, but plenty of things that are worse too, or we're just kind of middle of the road in a lot of ways.
No, I agree with you. As I was thinking about this last night before we recorded this, and I sat for probably an hour or two and just kind of thought about it and its ramifications. I think it, just like you were saying, it really is a microcosm of the thrust of what Brigham wanted to do, right? And what the Lord, I believe, inspired Brigham to do, which was go find an area nobody else wants. And out of that, you're going to build your own kingdom.
Yeah.
My kingdom.
Right.
And just by dribs and drabs, we let
That
Babylon
vision. Oh boy.
come in and creep in and subvert that.
Yeah.
Because when you're reading Brigham, there's a very he's making a really strong line, a really dark line between Babylon and us, right?
Yeah.
He speaks out against public schools, right? He's not a fan of public school systems.
We are now.
He's like, we do not want to do this. I think he actually says, why would I want Babylon to educate my children?
Yeah.
Right. And so he's keenly aware of this. And by
and there were, I mean, just that alone, like it's not a hidden thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was an open conspiracy.
Yeah.
By some folks to set up public schools in order to get Mormon children to not be Mormon.
You look at the Alta Academy. I mean, not the Alta Academy, excuse me. The Alta Club downtown, which was a club for businessmen who were, quote, Gentiles, right?
Yeah.
Who just their whole thrust was to subvert this. They figured out that Utah was kind of the crossroads of the West. You could get to the Southwest, the Northwest, all from this one hub. And they found natural resources, the minerals in the hills, and they understood
one impediment.
Right.
Zion.
Right. It was the Mormons, right?
Get rid of Zion.
Yep. And so I really do think it's a microcosm of what I think happened to Utah in those early days. And as tempting as it is to blame outside influences, I think probably the biggest takeaway that I thought about this is this idea of, no, this probably came from the bottom up, right? There was probably a lot of people who were on board with not being quite so weird, quite so different. And so sometimes I think that feeling of being different it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. But I think you got to count the costs, right? I don't think that when it did come from the bottom up, anybody was like, let's do everything we can to be like Philadelphia or be like Boston, right? They were like, well, that's a good idea. And Brother Brigham said that all truth belongs to Mormonism. So we'll just take this here, right? Because I'm good at making excuses for myself, I can kind of see how someone would get there, right? So I think it's two things. One is it harkens back to my takeaways, where it makes me harken back to those days and remember what it is that we should be about, right? Yeah. Which is a counterculture, a different society. And the other is you got to be on guard about that, because there's a lot of times those things will feel very appealing in the moment, but yet will subvert your ultimate goal.
Right. You know what I think it is too? A lot of it is it's not necessarily any particular principle,
right? But
it's a vision.
Yep.
That we are going to be a separate people. And once that vision is lost, then it's easy to just be like, well, we'll be more like our neighbors.
Yeah.
And just fit in. And this isn't really the kingdom. We're just we're just the church here. And we go to church and stuff, but we're not the kingdom. We're not building the kingdom. We just live in Utah.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yep. No, I agree. Well, dude, that was good stuff.
Yeah, pretty good.
Awesome. All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.
You're listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.